Hi, this is Dan Bullard, retired electronics engineer, sitting on the front deck of my houseboat. It's a great day. I want to talk about a couple of things. I asked Grok about the humps in a spectrum. Now, admittedly, ChatGPT didn't know the answer either. So AIs are stupid because the whole fucking world is stupid. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about what Grok said. It said that when I distort a sine wave and I get the spectrum, the humps or clusters of peaks in a spectrum are groups of these distorted products, primarily harmonics from the original sine wave frequency. For a sine wave, clipping creates odd order harmonics, third, fifth, seventh, etc. And these harmonics can spread across the spectrum depending on the severity of the clipping and the sampling characteristics of the ADC. Wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Sampling characteristics of the ADC have nothing to do with it. The humps are likely centered around these harmonic frequencies with additional sidebands or noise caused by aliasing, quantization effects, or imperfections in the ADC response. Bull motherfucking shit. Now, that goes back to my buddy Terry Wilson, who said basically the same thing. They don't know it. They don't understand it. They don't look into it at all. Nobody knows it. Matt Grady doesn't know it. And it's very, very, very sad. And I'm trying to get people to understand what I'm talking about. It's not magic, as I said before. And they're stupid. Everybody on the planet is stupid. You got to fix this. You guys have got to fix this. It's really something. I mean, in some ways, it's great being the smartest person on the planet. But in some ways, it's really horrible because I can't talk to Grok. I can't talk to anybody. I can't talk to Matt Grady. I can't talk to anybody about this stuff because they don't understand it. I know I've talked about this before, spectrum analyzers. There's a really huge problem, in addition to the fact that spectrum analyzers don't do coherent sampling. And I'll tell you how you get around that if you're smart. Spectrum analyzer has a big, big problem. It looks at the waveform coming in. The tallest thing in the spectrum is called 0 dB. And for us, that would be the fundamental. So the fundamental is by definition 0 dB. Now that's always the case. Network analyzers are a little bit different, but spectrum analyzers, 0 dB is the fundamental. And here's the problem. These people look at these things on the spectrum analyzer and they think 0 dB, whether the waveform is distorted or not, is always the same level. That's not true. If you distort a sine wave, you get harmonics. Where did the energy and the harmonics come from? They came from the fundamental, which in fact means that on a spectrum analyzer, the fundamental goes down. But you'll never see it because the spectrum analyzer adjusts it up to keep it at what it calls 0 dB. So everything is referenced as 0 dB. So if you distort a sine wave and you watch the harmonics go back and forth and do all kinds of crazy things, the amplitude of fundamental never changes. And that can't be. That makes you assume that your harmonics are free energy coming from nowhere, coming from thin air. But that doesn't happen. The harmonics are coming from the fundamental. But you don't know that unless you do what I've done. If you simulate it in Excel and hold everything relative to a 1 volt peak or whatever you want. I hold everything relative to a 1 volt peak, and I watched, and I used to believe it. I know I said this in another video. I used to believe that harmonics came from nowhere. The amplitude and harmonics come from the fundamental. And so it has to come from somewhere. There's no such thing as free energy. So the energy in the harmonics comes from the fundamental. So the fundamental actually gets smaller. Now it's really hard to see in a dB plot, but if you look at it in an absolute plot, it's brilliant. It works out just fine. So spectrum analyzers they make two major mistakes. One is that they consider the fundamental as 0 dB no matter what happens. Even if everything else knocks the fundamental down to 0, it would pick something else to be at 0 dB. So you really can't do that. You can't use spectrum analyzers that way. Now, if I was in the business, and I'm not, if I was in the business, I know an easy way, relatively, to make a spectrum analyzer that does coherent sampling without even sourcing the waveform. It's really pretty easy. Now, you know, I have developed ways to measure frequencies with very high accuracy. I mean, the thing where I measured duty cycle, I measured duty cycle to 1 part in 500,000. Now, if you're that close in something like duty cycle, you can get that close in frequency too. And I've done that on frequency with my article that I published in Test and Measurement World. If you can measure frequency extremely accurately, you can then change the clock on your spectrum analyzer. So change the clock using direct digital synthesis or whatever and make it appear coherent. It won't really be coherent, but you can make it appear to be coherent because, as my buddy David says, being close is good enough. And that's true. Being close is good enough. So if you can get really close to being coherent, that's good enough, and you can do everything coherent from a spectrum analyzer without actually sourcing the waveform. So you can do that. It's pretty simple. I mean, back in the old days, I could do it. But anyway, that's a really cool trick, and I'd like to get that going somewhere. HP, Tektronix, but those people can't understand anything I'm saying. Grok certainly can't. And ChatGPT can understand what I'm saying because it can read GIFs and animated movies and all kinds of things. But Grok can't read animated GIFs. Grok can't read movies. It even can't read animated GIFs that are running on a website. So it's really, really stupid. So I'm sorry. I know some of you like Grok. I can't use it. I cannot use it for anything. There's nothing I can use it for. So that's just some interesting thing. Just watch out for Grok. Don't use it. I like ChatGPT, and I know it doesn't really know what I'm talking about. Oh, the other thing about Grok is it can't keep secrets. I offered it the polar harmonic solution, but I said, you got to keep it secret. You got to keep it under your hat. And it said, I can't do that. Everything I do is public information. And I can't prove to Grok what it does because I can't show it an animated GIF. And the animated GIF is the only way to do it. Okay, that's enough for now. So once again, from the river, this is Dan Bullard. See ya.